there was so much of Boris in the beginning, but I'm curious what they actually told you when you got the script, what you actually knew about the character when you signed on.
I knew, so that's, I didn't know anything right before. So apparently there was like what I discovered when after I got it was really funny because I read for something else on the show, and then they came back and said, would he want to read for one of the series regulars? And I got these sides, and it was like really fun, witty writing. And I was like, oh, this is really actually written pretty well. This is really funny. Um, and I threw it down on tape, and fast forward, you get the job. And then I didn't hear too I heard from John McNamara, like he had a meeting, and he said, like, I don't want to make like this isn't your like typical hacker who's stuck behind the computer screen the whole series. Like he's smart, he's cocky, he's in love, you know, you're gonna see like an arc with him. He's gonna change in the show, and he's pivotal to the plot and whatnot. And of course, as an actor, like this is great, like this is what I want to hear. I want to play, So I was excited right away. And then I remember I got the first two scripts and I read, oh, remember the wedding scene in the beginning of the pilot? It's like Ziva standing opposite a groomsman, and it says like Ziva standing opposite like a short, lanky, bald man with missing teeth. And I read that and I was like, what? I was like, no one, I did that. No one told me this is what that I would have to wear a bald cap and have no teeth. Um, and I remember I called my reps. I was like, is this kind of like, am I going to be wearing prosthetics? Like no one, like John McNamara never said any of this. Like maybe I'm not the right guy. Like, I'm 6'3", you know, kind of fit. What's going on? And it's not till later I got on the show they reassured me like no, that was like an old version of the script. But Shelley Miles, who's one of the EPs on the show, said it was like we didn't know what to do with this character, and so like originally written we thought of someone like this. But she's like, I saw you as Zava in Ted Lasso, and we were talking about the role, and I was like, what about the Max Osinski who played Zava in Ted Lasso? And like I think the light bulb snapped for them. So that's kind of like after the fact, I heard like that's kind of how the character evolved into what you see on screen today. Um, and then to the writer's credit, like they take what you bring and they try to add like, what you propose when you're doing it, and they kind of add to it as the season goes, and have more fun with it. So it's like a living, breathing thing, like what's written is one idea of the show, then you got to shoot it and then you got to edit it so you tell the story three times, and between those two three things like it can change, um and that's what's exciting, but it's also it's always a bit scary. So when it comes out, it's really nice to knock on wood with this show, like the fans have been enjoying it and the reviews and stuff. It's all really really great to get that kind of feedback. It's a lot of work, and there's so much good TV out there and so many eyeballs to compete with. So, yeah, you just got to be grateful that anything gets finished, and then, then anything gets viewed even.
You've been a part of big shows in the past, big franchises in the past, but this is one of the biggest franchises in the world, even if it is a new show as part of it. What has it been like for you joining the NCIS universe?
Really, really great. I mean, like one thing I mentioned this earlier is like you get to meet a new fan base, and you get to find out like what they're obsessed about and like what excites them. So with every show that I've been lucky enough to like jump in and become a part of, it's always really nice to kind of like meet the fans and interact with them and see what they have to say, and doing interviews like this and seeing how people get excited. Um, so it's nice. It kind of like diversifies your experience in the business. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Obviously you get to go undercover again. What can you talk about the experience of filming those kind of undercover scenes when they're at the tech conference?
Well, that's always fun because it's always There's a heightened sense to the scenes. There's an extra layer of stakes. Everyone's out of their comfort zone, especially Boris. He's not going undercover. I wish he gave himself a better disguise than the baseball cap, but I think that says more about his experience trying to hide. Um, so it's fun, and it's fun to do it with this cast, and I think the writers did a really clever stuff where you also got to see relationships. You got to see Boris with Ziva on their own. You got to see Boris and Claudette outside of just being in front of the computer screens, and kind of like Boris trying to like pump her up and give herself more confidence. And it's great. It's great when the writers give you something like that to play, because it's always so much fun to do the character stuff and the fish out of water, you know, especially with the characters, the cookie characters that you like. I'm like, this Boris is such a fun guy to play. There's like, when I'm filming it, I'm kind of just trying anything that comes to mind, and they're like, well, they can edit that out if they don't like it. But you know, um, but he's so much fun to do. So
Yeah. Well, specifically with
I'm
the
game for anything.
Claudette of it all, obviously, you know, they are both helping Tony and Ziva within this world. How much of that dynamic do you feel kind of evolved from your real life chemistry when you guys were filming the earlier scenes, and how much of it was always kind of in the scripts of what you got because they just knew those characters would be fun together?
Well, what was in the scripts is really important because they were two very like different. Like, one's a rule follower by the law, the other one operates underneath the law, doesn't follow the rules. And what made it even better was like Amita's such a great scene partner, and she's such a fun actor that we were both open to talking to one another, and we would get together and like, what could we do to show the difference between these two characters that's just not on the page, behavior wise, blocking wise, so she was always game for anything, and I was always game for something from her, and I think that made we always looked forward to us working together on set on those days, because the writers did a great job of saying like, this is how you guys are different, and now you have to work together, and we'd get to figure that out on the day and see what would happen, and it was always like, oh, it's like, I'll eat this and like right over you, and she's like, yeah, I would probably hate that, if she's like a type A and he's such a free kind of like, no one tells me what to do, I operate on my own kind of stuff. So it's the dynamics fed itself, right? Amita's such a great scene partner that you get the writing, and with her and me, I think it just kind of just flows, and it works. Hopefully it works. Hopefully
It
it works.
it absolutely works. When we leave off the episode with Tony disappearing, trying to find Jonah, and the team desperately now trying to find him, what can you share about how A, Boris is handling it, and B, how they're trying to deal with trying to now get to Tony going forward?
Yeah, I think he's kind of he's pot committed now, and he's found himself A, in a position where he's not safe with Fuji if this doesn't get like handled properly, and B, he knows these people too well now to just kind of like abandon them and say, like what his attitude was in episode 2, like, I'll do this for you and then I'm out. And then, but they keep like forcing him to do it. I think now, and I think he deep down understands that, but he's not willing to admit it yet. And I think that's also really fun. It's kind of like, someone said this, there's like NCIS has a history of found family, and I think he's unbeen like unknowingly found a family here, you know, even though he aggravates them and they can find him irritating, but he's been helpful, and when it's counted, he's done the right thing.